Cool. And then for the students here, Lindie is, let me just do a quick intro for Lindie. Lindie is a product design or the product design manager at 99Co. Lindie was, joined 99Co as a product designer and then became the manager over time. Lindie is also a language teacher, if I'm not mistaken. I'm reading this from her LinkedIn, where she publishes regular YouTube videos about language learning methodology or language learning, and has quite a number of followers on that. And Lindie studied product design or information design at University of Pretoria in South Africa and moved to Singapore 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Cool. So without further ado, I think we'll hand it off to Lindie to introduce herself, and then we will transition to Q&A afterward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kai, for that.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Very, very nice to be here. Let me just share my screen and do can you all see my screen thing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. So today I'll just be sharing a little bit about the design team at 99.co and how we work with engineers. So a bit of background, I know super basics of HTML and CSS, and that's about as far as it goes. So today's presentation is going to be like a lot of design thinking and what we do heavy. So bear with me because we might be a bit different, but at the end we'll see like how do we connect, how do designers and engineers work together. So I'll be taking you through who our design team is, what we do, our work, who product designers at 99.co work with, some of our tools, how we do user research, how designers and engineers work together, and then a Q&A. So a bit about me. Thank you, Kai, for the introduction. You actually covered everything. So I've been at 99.co for about 2.5 years, helped grow the design team here, love language learning. And on the side, I'm trying to bridge languages and product design to build some language learning apps. So if you're interested in that, if you're interested in how do you develop specifically a language learning app from scratch, do feel free to add me on LinkedIn and message me there. Let me go through our design team and how we structure our design team at 99.co. So we use Pikachu team names and just pretend these are photos of designers. I'm not going to just put people's faces on here without their consent, but we generally have one product designer per team. And our teams are split into a monetization team, supply and conversion team, agent retention team. I just want to pause here, by the way, and make sure if everybody knows what we do at 99, or if I should do a quick company.
I think maybe just do a quick, I think some people are new as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so 99.co is a property search portal. And so we help people who are looking for properties to buy or rent. And then for the property agents, we also help them create listings, and we connect agents and buyers. So if you're wondering like what is agent retention, that would be a property agent, how we keep them on our portal. We also have a team that works on new launches, and we also have a team specifically for SEO. How do we bring people into our site through traffic? And then we have a cross-team user researchers. So every single designer on these teams also does user research. And then the designers, apart from the user research person, will work on product design and our design system. So I'll get into that in a bit. So our function within the company as the design team would be to advocate for our users. We as product designers are the bridge between the final people who use our product and how we build the product at our company. We don't just like anyhow design what we want, right? We have to think like, does what we design solve a user need? Do we really need this feature? Have we tested it with people? Stuff like that. As product designers, we're also the bridge between product, engineering teams, business, and users. So if you're working as a product designer, you have to think, the feature we're designing now, is it feasible for engineers to implement it? Does it meet both the business goals, maybe even the SEO and traffic goals, and the user goals? And we as product designers have to take those decisions. Do we need to cut down a feature into a smaller scope to make it solve this? Lots of questions that designers solve, and we work hand in hand with engineers to get that done. And as product designers, we don't just design the interfaces, but we're extremely focused on user research to create products that solve user needs. So we do a lot of usability testing, surveys, interviews to validate our products. So just a quick overview of some of the work that we do. I think when people hear UX designer, it's a lot of like, oh, so what do you actually do? Like, do you just create like put a color on a button? But like I've mentioned earlier now, it's a lot wider than that. And we follow the design thinking process. So if we get a brief of a problem we have to solve, as designers, we spend a lot of time empathizing, understanding the user problem. Like maybe somebody is looking to search for a property and they're looking for properties that have 2 bathrooms instead of 1. And we know that we don't have a filter on our website for them to search for bathroom filters. We only have it for bedrooms. So then we'll do research, like how many people actually have this problem? Is this something we should really build? We define the problem. We create user stories for that. We ideate upon it. How might we introduce this filter? I'm using a very basic problem as an example. We'll prototype it, we'll build it to test it, and then we'll hand it off to engineers to launch the final product. As designers, majority of our time is spent creating the user interfaces across desktop, responsive web, right? Android and iOS. We'll do the interface design and the interaction design for that. A bit less of our time is spent before that, researching, sketching, wireframing, planning it. We do a lot of testing, we prototype our stuff, we consolidate insights from user research, and then a bit less of our time is spent more on the people stuff, like having syncs between designers to make sure that we're all speaking the same design language, because one designer per team, every designer has their own way of doing stuff, right? So we meet regularly to say, hey, let's standardize this, or to brainstorm together. We really value collaboration. We also have a design system, which I'll dive into a bit later, and a part of our time is spent working on that. So some of the projects that we've done, recently we launched a new launch page. So those are, properties that are still under construction, really like atas condominiums. And these pages allow new launch buyers to get a ton of information in one place about the project. So we have a project comparison widget, we have virtual tours, we have transaction history, and this was a huge project. It's not just a single page that we're designing. It's all the interactions that go into, where on the page should the virtual tour sit? What kind of information do people want to see? How can we create this across desktop web and then also translate the experience over to the app? So we actually have a whole new team that was created just to work on new launches. One of my favorite features is something that I worked on with my team recently called Smart Description. So we have a listing creation flow that helps property agents create listings for their properties. And from our user research and our data and sort of page tracking, we realized that agents spend so much time creating descriptions for the listing. Some agents would spend up to 10 minutes trying to write descriptions. They would open Google Maps, other agents' listings, copy paste, and then put a description in. So we wanted to find a way to make it a lot faster for them. So this is a good example of where I work closely with the engineering team. I worked with backend to understand what data do we already have in our system on a specific project. So for instance, if an agent is selling a property at ABC condominium, we already have that information in our database that this condominium is like 24 stories. It was built in 2010. It's in this area with these amenities. And then we decide which of these pieces of information can we pull together for an agent to, with the click of a button, to automatically generate that. So we give them a template already that has nearby amenities, information about the project that they're listing it for. And then from the front end, we've added in some extra elements where the agent can click on stuff that is relevant to the specific unit. So we launched this and we noticed a significant reduction in the time that agents spent creating listings. So this was quite a small thing that we just added into an existing product that had really positive results. And this product lives within the listing creation flow. And something that we're working on launching, I think it's coming out next week, we used to have a very disjointed listing creation flow where we had something called a must-see listing, which is like a verified listing that gets a lot more views versus just a free regular listing. and we're trying to build this into one creation form. So there's a lot of, I think from the engineering side, things that you need to take from different pieces and combine it into one sort of code base. And then from the design side, we had all of these different flows that we have to bring into one. This was our largest user research project as well. And it might not seem like 17 participants is a lot of people, but working in a fast-paced startup and only having like a sprint or two to be able to do this, it's a really successful project in terms of how we were able to test this through prototypes and validate it. So our old design, agents had to click through a bunch of pages to create their listing. It was very disjointed. If you had a mistake, you had to go find which page it was in. And right now, what we're launching is that everything is sitting in one page. And we've also brought that over to the app. From the design side, how I might hand over this project to engineers, for instance, is making sure that my design file has all of the edge cases on it. So if we have one widget, there might be 10 different versions of how the widget is used. And as a designer, I make sure to put the stuff up front so that we don't start building it. And then the engineer says, hey, what happens if they click on this? What's the error state? So as designers, we have to work very closely with backend as well and say, okay, what will happen on the system if they upload a photo which is rejected in terms of quality? What kind of error banner do they see? And then as a designer, I need to create the copy for that. How do I make it succinct? How do I make it really easy to understand? And then for front-end developers, how do I map that out in a logical way for them so that the way I hand over my design can reduce conversations happening down the line where we haven't covered edge cases. So who do we work with as designers? I've kind of dropped a lot of hints right now, but we work very closely with both backend and frontend. So with backend, it would be more like designers would create the user flows, click here, this opens, what does that happen? And that's a really great opportunity to, for me as a designer to understand how backend engineers work and for engineers to understand how designers work. This is like one of the places that we overlap. And then with front end, with the software we use, I think perhaps I'm just assuming that some of you have already used Figma. You know that it will give you some CSS. That's our main tool that we use with front end. And then just some of the other teams we work with, we'll work with data if we need to generate reports on how our features are performing. If we need to do user research and we need to recruit people who have searched for a HDB 3-room property in the last month, data will give us that report and we can go recruit those users to talk to them. With SEO as well, we need to ensure that our designs are optimized for keywords. This is specifically for web, obviously not for app, but this is probably one of the biggest struggles as a designer. I saw one of the questions that came into Pigeonhole was like, what's one of the biggest UI UX problems? Maybe not the biggest, but this is something that you constantly have to work towards. As designers, we also need to be copywriters. How can I bring in these important SEO keywords, which is very text heavy, and still design a page that users will not be like, oh my gosh, why is there so much text on the page? So how do we build a bridge between SEO and the end user, right? And then of course, all of our work comes through the project managers. We get PRDs, which are requirement documents telling us why we need to build the feature, by when, what are the must-haves, so it's I'm just skimming through this quite quickly, so let me know if you have questions near the end if I went too fast, but I do want to save a large proportion of this for our Q&A session. So just very roughly the tools we used. We moved over from Zeppelin and Sketch to Figma, and we categorize our stuff into projects for app, for web, and our design system. So all of our engineers have access to Figma so they can go through this, and every feature that we work on has a specific file. We hand it off to engineers by having a lot of comprehensive notes, marking, where is it above the fold, what kind of CSS animations do we need to put in, what links to where. And then if we have time as product designers, we always strive to create prototypes so that people can see how it actually works. It's not just a static page, what connects to where. And these prototypes are also what we use to do usability testing. Yeah, that's just more about some of the notes we have for engineers and what our files look like. So the one thing that really grounds us as a design team is our design system. This is the shared visual language that we use. So like I mentioned earlier, every designer has their own way of designing something, right? I might think that, this pink button looks better, but you cannot just anyhow use your own style, right? It has to speak the same language so that it looks like one product, even though you're building it from different teams. This is not exactly what our design system looks like because this is very all over the place, very rabak, but I just dragged in some of the artboard so you can see the type of elements that we have in our system, right? So we might create modals or pop-ups that are standardized. All of our icons are categorized in here, all of the different states of our error fields and our selectors. And we've organized this in a way that the front-end engineers have access to say, instead of us needing to map out every single design saying, you know, this is the clicked button, this is the unclicked button, this is the selected form field, this is the error state. If we need to save time, we just design it and say, this is the component. Then engineers can click onto it, go into our system and see the different states of all these components. As designers, we use the atomic design principle. So that's starting from the smallest granular element and then building it up. So an example is this listing card that we have on our app. The atoms that build it up would be, for instance, the color. What is the color we've defined? What's the text size, the font, the style, what kind of icons, what kind of buttons, button text. So then you can see, for instance, this color and this text style and this icon is applied to something called a flag. These icons get some text to create this layer of information. Button color, button text creates this. And then these little elements or components get combined together to create this widget. So we don't start from scratch with every design we make. We start from the bottom with our defined stuff and piece it together. And I think that's also how engineers work, right? So you have your base styles that are defined somewhere, and then you'll pull from there. So we're hoping to expand on this as we go on, that our designs are not always just made from scratch. We have systems in place to make product development much faster. I will skim through user research because I don't think it's super relevant to this session, but I just wanted to touch on what kind of user research we do as product designers. So we're always testing our features as much as we can before we hand it off over to the engineers to release it. And some of the ways we test it is through usability testing of prototypes. We might send out surveys. We might look at where people are clicking on our page to see maybe this area has a lot of rage clicks or this page has very low views to show us where we need to move information. We even check the app reviews on our app stores, and all of this information we'll collate and decide what are the most important problems we need to solve and how can we make our products more user-centric. At 99.co, we also really value shared empathy. So that means we want to strive towards everybody having an understanding of our users. So what we do as a design team is, after we've done our user research sessions, we'll compile a really simple, easy to understand report and actually share it with the whole company. As designers, we also share and invite engineers to come into our user research sessions to sit in and see how people are actually using our product. So we try and involve engineers in the research process as well. This is just an example of some of the insights that we might create in our presentation deck so that everybody in the company has access to this. If they want to go really in detail and say, like, how are people really interacting with this flow? Or how do agents do their work? How did this feature perform in usability testing? We try and share this as much as possible so that we're not working in silo. It's not like, oh, I just do design, you just do development. You know, how can we create a shared understanding of our users? So the last part is how do designers and engineers work together? We have what we call a trio. So that would be the product designer of the team, the dev lead, and the product manager, who work together to scope out the work for a new feature. So in those sessions, as a designer, I might say, okay, dev lead, what kind of edge cases are there? Like, what's the time we have to develop this feature? Do we have time for testing this? The dev might say, okay, you know, this looks very simple from the design side, but it's going to take a lot of time. So can we cut down the feature to an MVP? And then the product manager will sort of liaise between us. So it's very important for us to have that step of collaboration before the designer just runs away and designs some very complex feature, right? As I mentioned, we love involving each other in our work. So engineers might regularly share their work in our weekly meetings. So even if it's just a work in progress, that could help us save some time down the line. designers have to do some QA, some quality checks at the end to see like, oh, there's a wrong font here, or we're missing an error state. We can save time by having engineers show their work while they're working on it. And designer can say, oh, this looks great so far, but by the way, I noticed you're missing an icon. Why not mention it while we're working on it instead of going through complex processes at the end and picking it up later? So really, we value iteration and collaboration throughout the whole process. We're also trying to build a culture where we, we are coworkers, but we're friends. We're comfortable with each other. We're open to asking the hard questions. If you've established that good relationship with your colleagues, then you know who to ask stuff for, and you know what kind of questions to ask. So I can be like, hey, engineer, I actually have no idea how this works. Can you explain it to me? Or, hey, I've made this user flow. Does it work for you? Not having these awkward periods of waiting for the PM to communicate that to the dev. You just go straight to someone. We have that open collaborative culture. I won't go into this in super detail, but this is generally our design process. And the little stars are the points in the process where engineers will be involved. So once we get the product requirement document, that's where we'll have the meeting with our trio and an engineer is involved. Within user research, if engineers would like to sit in and watch how users are using the product, they can do it there. We create user flows for people to see how all of the processes work. If you're creating a HDB property, if you're creating a rental property, if you're creating a for sale property, all of these are on the same product, but engineers need to know what are all the edge cases for those. So we have a lot of complex user flows, which could look something like this, that we map out as well. And this is where designers and engineers get a time to work together as well. Baking is what we call our sharing sessions, where we'll show our designs or our work in progress. That's where all engineers and designers on teams sit together and share work. And then right at the end, we'll do the developer handoff. So that's where I'll put the notes in my file for engineers. I'll connect it to the design system where they can access it. It'll be a Q&A session to say, did we miss an error state, or are we all aligned on how this feature works? And then right at the end, designers will also work with engineers to QA it. So here's an example of some bugs that I recently filed. This is assigned to back end. This is assigned to front end. We kind of work in tandem like that. I think I've mentioned already about, having clear specs and notes and iterating constantly. Another part of how we work together as designers and engineers is for me as a designer to say, hey, engineers, how has our process been working for you? Us having the files here on Figma or Zeppelin or Sketch, how is that for you? How can we improve it? How can we make it faster? So a very quick example is we used to separate iOS and Android files in different folders. And essentially it's the same feature, but for different platforms. And we actually reduced the time people spend opening these files and locating the flows significantly just by combining them all into one folder. It sounds super simple, but we wouldn't have known that this was an issue unless we have these conversations constantly between design and engineering about how to improve our processes and time. And then quickly on Slack, we actually have a channel specifically about our design system. So as designers, we might update the color or update a widget. And as designers, we'll know, but engineers also need to know that we've made that update. So it'll be in our design file, but then we'll just post a message on Slack and say, hey, I've actually updated this element, or I've added this new widget, just so that everybody has oversight and we're communicating very clearly. The way we lay out our pages as designers as well. We have all of our UX flows in every file that we work on. We have a mini components library where everything that was built for this feature, the main component of that is living there. And then the iOS designs, the Android designs, the web designs, everything is laid out very neatly there. And that just makes it much faster. There's no files lying around everywhere. It saves us a lot of time. I'm sorry I sped through that, but it's really because I wanted to save time now for the Q&A session. So let me stop sharing and yeah, we'll open it up. Yeah,
that was so helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm gonna turn my attention to the Pigeonhole Q&A board. We have about half an hour left. And so if you haven't already, let me just reshare the link in the Zoom for anyone who might have joined recently. And I will be moderating from that page. Lindie, you have access to it too, right?
Yeah, I do. Would you like me to open it on my side, or are you going to share?
I'm not going to share it so that we can kind of all just see you so that focuses on you and less on that page. But feel free to open it on your side and reference it as well. I'll be marking questions as active and answered as we go. The top voted question so far is, how do designers work with engineers? And you've just covered that in your presentation. So I just want to open it up to the group. Does anyone have any follow-up questions for Lindie on that, on what she mentioned about how designers work with engineers?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote it down at the very bottom of the course, but since you mentioned that you're also very interested in language, I'd be wondering, do designers talk differently from engineers, and how have you been able to bridge that gap?
That's a very interesting question. I think the first thing that popped into my head, it could be more specific to working with iOS and Android developers, is the way we name components could be different. Like, is this thing called a top bar? Is it a navigation bar? Is it a nav bar? Is it a menu?
Right.
Designers sometimes will just anyhow call it what we think, right? But we're trying to work towards, with our design system, the way we name our components, do we name it the same way that engineers do? So in a sense, yes, we do talk differently, but by having these systems in place, we can have naming structures that are shared across the teams. I'm not sure if that answered your question at all.
That's great. I really like that. I never realized that, yeah, different kind of developers talk different languages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even for Android and iOS, what is called a modal in iOS or web is called a dialogue in Android. So
Right.
we have to name it differently in our system. And as designers, it's not compulsory or required for us to learn how to code, but especially designers who work with web design, it really helps to have a basic knowledge of HTML and CSS. If we want to bring in some animations, or if we want to help engineers understand a bit faster, like what are the color codes we use, or what kind of, just understanding the code a bit to know how engineers work can help designers design in a way that makes sense for them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really love that. It seems like engineers and designers work very closely together. And so it's like, people, yeah, it's really, I like that. Chico's here. Chico's having lunch. Moving on to the next question. Tanesh has a question. What irritates you about engineers, developers? Well, everyone wanted to hear from this.
That is so funny. Oh, I don't know. I feel...
Be honest.
You can be specific to Jicon if it helps.
Honestly, I think because designers spend so much time meticulously designing everything pixel perfect, sometimes with the lack of time in a startup, we have to work really quickly and release an MVP. It has to be good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. And me coming from an agency background where everything was like very perfect and we spent 6 months to 10 months designing a feature, to moving to a startup where you have to do the same amount of work in 2 weeks, once that is released, I'm not saying engineers like do a bad job, but it's sometimes like the MVP version, right? So we have to release things over time. The designer will design the whole huge feature, and we would love for it to just be released already. But engineers are like, this is massive. Let's do it in pieces at a time. So you might have something that looks like some kind of like Frankenstein monster of old components and new components. And it doesn't annoy me, but it means that there's a lot of QA that I have to do. And I have to understand which of this is part of the old flow that we will update later, which of this is the new component. And then I have to go in and check, is it the right font? Is it the right color? Are the icons blurry? Is it pixelated, misaligned? These very, very small details can be frustrating to someone with a very sharp eye for pixel perfection. But I wouldn't say it's a problem. It's a part of the process. We are a startup. We are iterating. We're constantly building on our features. So as designers, I also have to learn, like, don't expect everything to be perfect from the start. How can I lower my expectations a bit and work iteratively in the same mindset that engineers do?
Awesome. Tanesh, that answer your question?
Yeah, that's, thanks so much.
I think I just want to add one more thing that's a bit different there. It's as designers, we also focus so much on the user needs and like understanding how our users are using our products. And sometimes as a designer, I wish that engineers would take a bit more interest in that. It's not that they don't, maybe there's no time in the busy schedules to do that. But the times that I have worked with engineers who say, hey, can I join a user research session? Or even just the way they ask questions like, hey, what did the user say about that? Or what is our data saying about the usage of this feature? That is really positive to see people who don't just focus on the engineering work that they do, but they look at the product as a whole. They say, is this really something we should be working with? Have users been asking about this? When you ask questions about the users or about design, that shows that you are open to working a bit broader than your scope. And that's a really good thing to see. It's not something that annoys me. On the contrary, I wish more engineers would ask those types of questions.
All right, did everyone hear that? Okay, think about the users. Okay. Moving on to the next question. From Frankie, what are some of the biggest UI UX design challenges you have faced at 99Co?
One of the projects I touched on now was the very big listing creation flow that we are working on right now. And for me, it's more the scope of the project and how do we split it up to release such a large feature in smaller parts. So like I mentioned earlier, I would love for the feature to spend 3 months on designing it and then releasing it in one go. But a big problem is for me as a designer to say, which parts of this can we cut down on? What's the MVP that we can launch? And I think everything is a design challenge because we are not the users. We don't understand the people who are using our products. We can make big assumptions, but everything, the smallest thing will be a challenge because you need to go and test it or see the data or see how people use it. Yeah, another challenge that I mentioned earlier was working with the SEO team. So this is specific on web design as well. How do I make sure that our pages are optimized for the keywords without just anyhow putting so much text on a page? So as designers, a big challenge that we need to do is bridging all of the business, the SEO, the engineering requirements with an optimal user experience that is streamlined, clean, and easy to use.
Wow. Yeah, didn't realize that SEO would be such a big part of it. Frankie, did you answer your question?
Yeah, I didn't realize SEO was such a, I mean, I don't know anything about SEO, so yeah, thanks for that.
Awesome. Next question by Dave. As a developer, design and good UI practice may be something that we do not work with often. What are some ways a developer can improve in the aspect of gaining design intuition?
Oh my gosh,
super important for all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. That's such a great question. And it's so good to see that you're even thinking about this and asking about it. So of course, I'm not going to say go take a design course or go learn how to use Figma, right? Because that's the idealistic answer. A bit more realistically, on a smaller scale, ask questions, be interested in what the designer is doing. If you are working on, yes, join 99.co, exactly, because we work together. So for instance, at 99, every week we'll have these check-in meetings where the designer will present their work. A bad example would be for an engineer to just zone out and then at the end be yeah, okay, the flow looks good, right? A good example for you to sort of hone that design intuition is to really focus on how is the designer talking about it? What kind of things are they mentioning? Ask your questions. Say, why did you design it in this way? Why did you place it there? Try to understand what's going on in the designer's brain. Also, keep your eye out on the different products that you use. Any product that you're using every day, look at the small interactions that are going into it. Look at how, if you click on something on an app, what slides up from where, what kind of animations. Try to just look at it from a different perspective. Think if I was a designer, how would I design this? Why is it being built this way? And another thing that I know is gaining so much popularity in companies these days is design systems. I think about 10 years ago, we didn't really think about design systems that much. That's a great place where designers and engineers are working together. So Figma, the main software that we use, they have an incredible YouTube channel with a ton of tutorials and talks. You can just go and watch some videos that Figma have released, understanding what's the importance of a design system. Designing, how can you improve gaining design intuition? Yeah, I would just say be curious. Do your research. You don't need to go and learn how to do design, but maybe watch some talks, check out how Figma talks about design and just ask questions to designers. If you're curious about a specific thing, Designers love sharing, so be curious.
Dave, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Just to add on to that, I think it's because good design is taken for granted by users because it's so seamless that we don't even notice it. And it's something that I kind of struggle with now that I'm actually developing something that user might potentially use, and it's something that I've always taken for granted. So yeah, I'm just trying to kind of identify what makes good design, like what kind of makes the user's interaction with the product the most seamless and the most easy to understand. And I think trying to understand the science behind that is what really helps kind of build the intuition. And I was trying to find different kind of approaches to kind of develop the intuition.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say, which I think Darius he read my thoughts, is you can have some sort of idea of what you think a good design is and how it works, but you'll never really know until you see how people are using your product, until you test it. So maybe if you're working on a side project as a developer, you're just working on it on your own, go ask your friends, go ask your family, get people to test it remotely. It doesn't have to be super structured and professional. You just open a video call, open the thing and say, I want you to navigate through this. Show me how you would perform the action. Show me how you would, purchase this item, and then watch what they do. If they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what is going on here, then you ask why. Then they say, well, it looks very confusing. Why? Oh, because there's 10 buttons. Then okay, maybe good design means only one button and not 10 buttons, right? Asking why, until you get to the core of what the issue is. And that will mean it's a good design, right? When you solve those problems. Then the last recommendation I want to give is to look up Nielsen Norman Group, NN Group. They are sort of the huge company for the setting standards and best practices for UX design specifically. They have a lot of articles, videos. You can go into there and understand why do people make the decisions they do as users? What are some frameworks and best practices you can use? And then the last thing, go into websites, see things like Product Hunt. That's where new products are always, advertised. Look at the products that are doing well and try and figure out why are they doing well. You can take screenshots, you can collate it together and say, what do I like about this? Why do I think this is so successful? It's not always just about the feature, solving a user need. If you're asking more from a design perspective, is their landing page organized in a way that is very seamless? Like take screenshots of different pages, compare them, try and figure out for yourself and ask people around you why this is so successful. You can make it into a large project, take a few apps that you like, test it with people, say, why do you think Instagram is your favorite app? Is it the clean design? Is it because it solves a user need? Yeah, do some research on your own on successful products and try to figure out why they're so successful.
Right. Thanks so much.
That was great. Okay, related question. Oh, go on.
Yeah, I have a following question actually. I was just wondering if you could characterize what your opinion is on, for everyone in the room, why should designers want to know about, engineers want to know about design? Maybe just from more of a personal perspective, like how does it, in their day-to-day life, is it going to help them? Is it going to help them in their job? Or maybe characterize how your advice on how they would approach that.
I think both ways, designers to engineers, engineers to designers, it'll make your job feel more rewarding and worthwhile if you understand the amount of work that goes into it. I know a lot of designers who couldn't care less about engineering. They just want to make a very beautiful design. And then a lot of engineers who just want to make it functional and don't care about design. Once you start asking questions, once you're curious about how the other person does their work, then you'll realize, wow, there's a lot of work that goes into it. I have an appreciation for it. I have an understanding for it. Now as an engineer, I can build my products also in a way that designers will value. They'll feel that their work has value. Some of the worst things for a designer is to create this beautiful design, and once it's released, it's like very, very bare bones, right? So if an engineer says, hey, I know that we don't have time to make the perfect design, but let's work together, let's have a chat. What are the minimum requirements you have? How can I understand your design thinking? And then how can a designer understand the way the engineer works so that you can work together. A good thing I would recommend that we do is those work in progress QA sessions. I might just jump on a call with a developer and say, talk me through what you've been doing on this project so far. And then that's an opportunity for engineers to see what kind of things are important to me as a designer and for me to understand how they work. So the more you talk to each other, the more you'll have an appreciation and an understanding of design and engineering. I'm not sure if I answered the question exactly in the way you asked. Let me know if there's anything else I can clarify though.
Yeah, that answers my question. I think I was also asking it maybe more from a career perspective, or like, how does it help you in your everyday job, and then also how does it help you kind of as you go forward in your career as an engineer? Like,
I think engineers who have a basic sense of design knowledge, even if you do just a quick course, you watch some free videos on UI or UX design, if you have those basic skills, it can elevate you just a step further already. If you need to be launching your own product and you don't have a designer on board, at least having a design sense of like basic color theory, or where do people click on a page, what kind of navigation structures work, why should you color contrast. Those types of things are things that you can add on and say, as an engineer, I can't just, I not only do I just build the product, but I have a sense of what makes a good design. That can elevate you a lot further.
That's awesome. That's huge. And I think that also answers the question, what would you want prospective engineers at 99Co to learn before joining 99Co? Was there anything to add on to that, Lindie?
What would I want them to learn before joining 99? I think it also depends on what your role will be. If you're going to be backend, iOS, Android, or web. If you're specifically a web developer, it really, really helps to have a basic understanding of UI design. What are design principles, color theory? Why is user research important? Even just knowing those terms can help already for you to have an appreciation for design. Yeah.
Awesome. But for the others, less so. For
not less so, but of course, when you have an interest and you're curious about it, it helps a lot. Like, I don't expect backend developers to know, what colors are the best for something, but I expect them to build that relationship with me of a mutual understanding that, we're able to go to each other and work together and ask questions. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Frankie has another question. What are your thoughts on dark patterns, so-called black hat UI, that websites and apps use to trick people to make people do things?
Oh my gosh, it annoys me so much. It is so terrible, and I just think it's unethical. I'm talking about stuff like where you're trying to delete your account and you have to go through so many pages and then email someone and then get a code. Like, people just want to trap you into their products. They want to sell their products so much. As a UX designer, my role is to make things easy for the user. This is the most hardest thing that you can do for a user, right? I think it's like a heavy push from business or sales or marketing. Depends on who the company is to really push something. I think there's different ways around the problem. So recently I was working on a side project with a friend, and one of the things we wanted to do is bring more visibility on a language learning product we were building. We wanted to show that you can find a language learning tutor while you're doing a language lesson online. And sort of the first thought that popped in is like, why don't we just put, if you get a question wrong on your language learning app, there's a little pop-up that says, hey, you can book this lesson with a language tutor. That is not necessarily a dark pattern, but when we tested it, a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, I just got one question wrong. Why are you pushing this so heavily? It's like aggressive marketing. Not a dark pattern, but only after testing it, I realized, oh, maybe this is not what the end user wants, right? So I think it's terrible to push your product so much that it's not solving the user need. It's very one-sided. It's only looking at pushing sales, pushing signups. And it's a very hard thing to do, because sometimes as designers and engineers, you're required to do something at a smaller scale. For instance, for our listings here, of course, we want to push verified or must-see listings. And these are paid features that have a good impact on the user experience of finding a property. So how do we push our property agents to pay for a fancy looking listing without doing it in a way that they fall into a trap, right? So we need to put it up front. We need to increase the visibility, but we have to do it in a way that is safe for them. Say, hey, you're going to be paying this amount of credits for it. Are you sure you want to proceed, right? We're not sneaky. We have to combine the business needs with the optimal user experience.
Yeah, that's huge. Wow, so much stuff to think about when building from. Frankie, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so actually you answered a follow-up question that I already had. Like, so I asked this because I in general, like, good UI does influence like your user behavior. So it's more of like, how do you balance like knowing how your user thinks, but in an ethical manner? Yeah, so great answer, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great. All right. Switching gears a little bit, how has teaching language learning helped you in your design career? How does that complement your work as a designer at 99?
Sure. Maybe I'll remove the teaching word because I don't necessarily teach languages.
Oh, okay.
I've tutored languages before, but it's more of like creating content on language learning methodology and tips. So maybe teaching people how to learn languages. So just before most people join the call, I had a quick chat with Steph about how I apply product thinking into my language learning journey. So for me, I'm learning quite a number of languages, between 8 to 12, depending on how I feel. So of course, it would be impossible for me to be like, okay, in this whole year, I want to become fluent in 10 languages. So I try to use like product thinking and say, this year was the first year that I split my language learning into quarters and say, quarter one, I'm going to focus on these 2 languages. These are the results I want to get. And then at the end of the quarter, I do a mini like retrospective with myself and say, what are the techniques that help for me? Do flashcards work for me, or do I prefer talking to people to learn more? So I iterate on my own language learning process. I go back and I use this like framework thinking of planning a roadmap, iterating on your processes when I'm learning. Then on the other hand, with the amount of languages that I know, I'm actually able to research design in different languages. I speak Hungarian, and there's a really good podcast about UX design in Hungarian. So if I need to research something while I'm doing my job, like, what's the best practice for designing form fields, instead of just doing it in English, why don't I do it in Spanish or in Hungarian? So then I learn a language and I learn design at the same time. And then the last thing that was super cool for me is understanding how languages impact UI UX design. I used to live in Japan, and Japanese apps are super busy. They put all the information there. At first glance, you'll just be like, oh, that's just because that's Japanese design. But if you really understand the language and the culture, you'll realize that people value all the information up front. They value transparency. They value being able to access everything. So of course, Japanese websites are going to put every single menu item up front on one page because it shows that you are honest. You're not having dark patterns. You're communicating everything that your feature does.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Western world, we would be like, no, simplicity, minimalism, clean it up, right? So learning a language is also learning a culture. When you know a culture, you know how your users will behave using your products. And also with scripts, Chinese characters save so much more space. If you've ever tried tweeting in English and then tweeting in Chinese, you can write a lot more in Chinese, right? It's because one character is a whole word, whereas in English, that word would be 5, 6 to 10 characters. So those are just interesting things that you can keep in mind specifically when you're designing. And I hope it's not a shameless self-promotion, but I do have a talk I did at a Polyglot conference last year where I talk about how how languages impact UI UX design. So I'll just post the link in here if you want to see a bit more about it.
That'd be perfect. Awesome. Everyone's going to go watch that afterward. Xiuping has a great question. Do you see more possibilities for roles that intersect between engineering and design for people who are learning to be engineers, but also passionate about design?
Absolutely, yes. I think roles that are growing now are UI engineers or design system engineers. So if you're really interested, like if you are like a pixel perfect developer who thinks about the edge case of every state, like every state of the button or the form field, maybe you'll be interested in design systems. So I think where that can be bridged as well, designers might design it, but we need engineers to build the component, maybe on a platform like Storybook or someplace that once I've built it on design, there's sort of this components library that's been made in code. There are definitely roles that intersect with that. And I think the first thing I can think of is like UI engineers or UI developers, where you'll be building these smaller components to create design systems.
So yeah, shipping, does that answer your question?
Well,
Like,
thank you.
like building the components, right? The building blocks. Helping to build them.
I think that's actually for much larger companies. It's like huge companies will have these smaller roles for like UI engineer or like interaction engineer, designer. There are much smaller roles. Whereas if you're working in a startup, if you're starting your own product, there's also an opportunity for you to interact with engineering and design. I'm working with an engineer now on a language learning flashcard app, and even though he's an engineer, he's also helping to draw the wireframes to see the product flows. And I'm helping him by saying, oh, I've taken your wireframe and here's the design I've made, and this is why I made the decision. So we learn from each other. So if you start your own side project with someone, you can create that role for yourself, like see what you're interested in and find opportunities to do it.
Okay, yeah, because I thought, I think it's similar to what David asked just now, because we are now building a lot of our projects and we're doing both roles, right? We're designing it and then we're also doing it. And so, and I really do enjoy doing both of them, both aspects of it. So I was just wondering if it's, it's a bit of a shame if like at the end of the day in your job, you're not going to, like, you're sort of like doing something more exclusively compared to the other thing. Yeah, but it's good to know that it's not necessarily that way.
I hear what you say. That's a valid concern. At 99 specifically, we also value having people move across teams. Like if you start as a Android developer and you want to move over to web developer or iOS, or even if you want to move over to a designer, we will help you train and learn. So there's always opportunities to move. And then for me specifically, there's so much that I'm interested in. What I try to do is make time for my own side projects. Like, if I want to make a language learning app, is there time in my schedule that I can do it so that I can work on that? So you might think, yeah, I'm working as a developer, but I love design. So can I try a side project on the time? I'm not advocating for us all not to get sleep and just do side projects all the time, but start creating these opportunities for yourself, because that's where you can grow and see, which one do I like more? Do I want to do a role switch? And then work at a company that will allow you to do that role switch, like 99.co.
No plug there. Akira has a good question. During user research, how do you know what to ask and what to look out for? Do you have any maybe quick examples of that?
I do. I'm just trying to open something that I can share that is not private. So let me see. I don't think I can share a tab. Let me share here. Oh my gosh, sorry. So at the beginning of a user research study, we have a documentation deck that we set up where we identify the goals we want to learn. So for instance, if we're creating a new feature where we want to test, what kind of property videos do property searchers like? Once you set the goals first and say, we want to figure out like what videos people watch, what kind of content keeps them engaged. Once you set the goals, that's what you can use to start formulating the questions and make sure that every question. Pardon?
Sorry, I think that was.
Okay.
Andre, I think it was an accident. Yeah.
Okay, so we have this research doc that keeps everything organized, and we'll add our questions in here. That doesn't answer your question directly, but I wanted to show you like our first step there. Then the questions we ask have to relate to our goals. We can't just be like, do you like the product? Is it nice to you? You have to make sure you ask what you want to find out. So define what you want to learn first, and then ask your questions in that way. Then the most important thing, the most high level thing I can say in a short amount of time is don't ask leading questions. A trap that people fall into is, do you like the design? Would you use this? Would you click here? People are of course gonna say, oh yeah, I think I'll click there, or yeah, sure. Like you have to ask your questions in a much broader way. Say, if we introduce a new feature on a page, instead of saying, do you like our new feature? We say, do you notice anything different on the page? If they say no, we say, okay, do you want to take a look around? Then they say, no, I don't see anything. Then can you say, okay, well, actually, this is a new section. Then don't say, what do you think about it? Say, can you tell me what you think it will do? That's a really interesting question to ask. What do you expect will happen when you click here? Then you know what's the user expectations, right? So if you put a new menu item and you say, what do you think it will do? Then you might get an insight into what people need or what people want. And then you can say, okay, please open the page. Was this what you expected? You can give people time to go through it first. Don't say, the first second they land on the page, say, okay, please click there, please click there. You say, all right, I'm going to give you time, look at it. What's your opinion? What do you understand from it? And then you can give them a task. Say, I'd like to see how you would purchase this pair of shoes. And then you watch where they click and something. Just observe and ask very broad questions and then drill down into why. That's what I mentioned earlier. If someone says, this page is an information overload, I don't like it. Then you say, why? Then they're like, there's too much text. Then you say, why? Is the text not answering the questions you're looking for? Is the text in the wrong font color? Keep asking why. Don't ask leading questions, and give users time so that you can watch how they would naturally behave, and then you drill down into the details.
That's huge. Wow, that's a huge lesson right there. Okay, I want to be mindful of time. I know we're running short on time, so I'm just gonna ask one final question to maybe summarize and to have Sri and Yuting's questions asked. Would you have any final advice for how mid-career switchers or people with no design or developer background could take a first step to enter this field? And would you have any favorite resources that you would recommend for the group?
Sure. I think what I mentioned earlier is Nielsen Norman Group for just user research best practice. Am I allowed to mention another bootcamp that is specific to design?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Another one called Memorizely.
Okay.
They're a bit pricey, but they have a very cool community of designers, a Slack channel you can join, and they have some design boot camps there. I would also really highly encourage starting your own project, even if it's a tiny thing that doesn't materialize. Being able to show that you have design thinking, like researching a problem, solving it through mapping out user flows and a concept design. You don't have to have the perfect design. You just need to show that you're thinking of the user and the edge cases. Read up a lot about different people's case studies, read Medium articles, look at apps that have been made already, and try and copy that for yourself, like make a little fake project for yourself. And then if you have any designer friends, ask them to take you through how they set up their file structure, how they come up with designs. Be curious, watch content from product designers, try and work on your own projects. Yeah, just be curious and dive into everything that you can.
Thank you so much, Lindie. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great.
Can we take a group photo before we break?
Yeah, for sure.
Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to, if you don't have your camera on your camera, so you can be in the photo. Okay, we're gonna do this. Ready? Oh, nice. All right, now everyone on that camera. Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, one more. Oh, there is the sound. 1, 2, 3. Cheers. Okay. Thanks, Lindie. Thanks, everyone.